with all of the technological advancements that are happening so rapidly, how does that filter down to the education system? By the time it's got to the teachers, it's already obsolete or moved on.
Yeah. I was talking to a guy he is a teacher, and he was telling me that he thinks that at my generation, around the 30s, we might be ahead of the kids, because kids these days are kind of so mollycoddled with technology. Everything's done for them, whereas we kind of had to learn how to do things ourselves. But I mean, we're all becoming technologically dumber and more dependent.
Sadly, more dependent upon the technology, which does mean we rely less upon our own innate ability to discern or know things or
we've started. If that's cool, man, I may as well just roll. It's rolling. So
okay, fantastic. Sounds good.
On that, like I'm sure you remember using a map and actually learning a city and learning how to get to a place. I don't know about you, man, but that's gone for me. Completely gone.
I'm old school, man. Like really, when I grew up, the world was a different place entirely. Yeah. I mean, it's completely before internet, before phones, before anything like that. We used to have to write letters back in the day. When I was traveling, it would take 2 weeks for a letter to get from wherever I was to, say, my friends or my parents, and take another 2 weeks for them to reply. So you'd get monthly installments. That was it. And, time was definitely slower. Everything was slower. It's one of the interesting things about being my age is that I've seen the world change from this, one modality and, slowly changing, but now rapidly in an accelerated kind of accelerating spiral that is just like now completely and utterly different. And it's quite interesting from my point of view to see that shift, to have witnessed that from a place where time had a completely different context to where it is now. So, I'm not judging it, but it's just really interesting to experience that.
Yeah, it must be quite fascinating. I mean, I just turned 38 and I've noticed things myself, but there's only, I feel like I've only really been awake for maybe 8 years, maybe. So actually self-aware and starting to kind of observe myself and my place in the world. 10 years at the most, and I've noticed, massive changes, and I can imagine how much things have just transformed into something that is like even the way that we interact. I mean, look at this, what we're doing right now. This was just absolutely unheard of.
And I do celebrate technology. I think technology is wonderful, but it requires a kind of a responsibility to grow with it, because otherwise, as you mentioned earlier, one can become dependent, one can become disempowered even from using technology, because you start to rely upon that and the more innate abilities start to atrophy. You either use it or you lose it. And I notice a lot of people who, especially younger people who completely rely upon it, if it was to be taken away, it would be a disaster. Do you know what I mean? And so the basic human values, the basic human abilities need to be maintained and need to be nurtured in order to create that balance. Otherwise, what happens if the technology is taken away? And, last week we experienced, I think it was a half a dozen major X-class solar flares. Well, in 1859, they had a thing called the Carrington event in Canada, where one solar flare took out the entire electrical system. Admittedly, it was a very rudimentary system in 1859, but it was a system nonetheless. And just last week, we had 6 of them, which, impacted the magnetosphere on our planet really, really deeply. And in some parts of the world, certainly there were outages. And, of course, people saw auroras even in Perth and Melbourne and the middle of America as a result of this. So what I'm saying is that if there was to be one really super mega X-class flare, it would take out satellites, it would take out electrical systems and everything, like getting codes on phones or, everything is computerized now. It would be a major disaster, really, because people are so dependent upon the technology and haven't. And I think it's really important for people to start realizing that we need to maintain this balance of sovereignty, of being self-sufficient as well as enjoying the benefits of technology.
Oh, it's so out of balance, man. There's some statistic that I heard somewhere that if the internet worldwide were to just disappear, it's something like 80% of the population would be dead within a few weeks because of all the systems of energy and just resources that we get. And obviously those numbers, I'm just making them up because I can't remember them, but it's astounding. And when I think about it, I don't know how to live off the land. I mean, the best that I could do with my current skill set would be become a prepper and go and stock up canned goods now. That's the only skills I currently have. So I'm like, fuck, I need to find myself some hunter gatherers so I can, shag up. Maybe I'll just appear on your doorstep up in the Northern Rivers going, mate, Dar Pan, help.
You're welcome. I think if that were to be the case, if a scenario like that were to happen, my place probably would become a bit of a sanctuary because, we are absolutely self-sufficient here. We have our own electricity, our own water systems, our own gardens and so on and so forth. But, we still use the supermarkets and still go and shop in town and stuff. But
so you're off-grid?
Off-grid.
That's amazing, man.
But I'm very aware that if the supply chain were to stop, it takes 3 days max for a supermarket to empty out.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah. Well, it's
then
anarchy,
it gets very
isn't
desperate.
It?
That's
really?
right, anarchy.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's amazing that you've done that off-grid thing. I'm very intrigued about doing that. How? So did you put all that into your home? Have you created all that, or was part of it already there?
That's right. Yeah. No. Well, when I arrived here about 13 years ago, I had the choice of because there was no electricity on the land, of either hooking up to the grid or to go solar, and it was going to cost me $30,000 just to put a pole on my property, then another $20,000 to bring it down to my house under the ground, and then they were going to charge me for it, every month.
Yeah.
Whereas the entire solar system cost me $30,000 to set up, and I've been living off the sun now for 12 years without any kind of bills whatsoever.
Wow.
And in fact, recently when we had the floods here in Byron Bay, you may have heard about that a couple of years ago, we had all this inclement weather. Everybody else's power was out because of, power lines that had gone down, etc. But fortunately, we were still able to have power during that crisis. And, we were cut off from town for up to 3 weeks because of sinkholes and avalanches and stuff, apart from the floods itself. And so it was a good test to see how important it is to be off-grid and to be prepared for that eventuality, because it is a very real possibility.
It happened.
It happened. But also in terms of the internet going down, which you mentioned, the World Economic Forum has already said, look, with the cyber attack, that could completely go down. I don't know whether that was a threat or a promise.
Yeah.
But you can be sure that it's in the realms of possibility.
They do seem to kind of telegraph their promises these days, don't they?
With the predictive programming from Hollywood and everywhere else.
Yeah, man.
Have you seen that movie that Obama was one of the producers for? Barack Obama. It was a movie. It's on Netflix called, oh my goodness, I've forgotten the title of it, but it was about what would happen if the internet were to go down, if there were to be a cyber attack and computers were to fail and, satellites were to fail. And it's a movie on Netflix called, I can never remember the title, but it's worthwhile checking out. Just look it up. It's Obama is the main producer. And so if Obama is the producer, you can be sure that he probably is predicting or predictive programming is happening through Hollywood to kind of inform people in some way about that eventuality or about that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting situation. You've got a former president of the US producing movies. Okay, that's not that unheard of. It's not really what you think they would go into, but okay. No. So he's either warning us like to try and help, or he's in on something, and it's a programming thing.
Exactly. Either way, I think it's tantamount to saying that it's a very strong possibility at some point. And so I think people should take note, not to go into fear, but certainly to be cognizant of the fact of how dependent we are upon the supply chain and upon the technology to do what we do. I mean, if people suddenly go to a tap, turn it on, and there's no water that comes out, or if they turn on an electrical switch and the light doesn't come on, it's quite a dire situation. As you say, people have not been trained to be self-sufficient or even to know how to survive, really.
Yeah.
And I'm not a prepper by any means, but I'm certainly into taking care and looking at the way that things are going on the planet.
Yeah.
And there are various reasons why it's going that way. And to be just aware of that and to start being proactive in terms of the eventuality of that and be able to deal with an outcome like that. Because at the moment, people will go, oh, yeah, wow, that could happen. But, what does that mean for you? I mean, what happens if the supermarket empties out in 3 days? It's a very real, kind of issue that we need to address, at least to come together, and to have. I mean, I'm sure the government would have its thing in place, like probably be locked down, and perhaps there'd be some sort of handout that happens, but that can only, that makes you even more dependent upon the government itself as well. So I don't know if there's any real solutions that out there other than to be, connect with community, I think is a really powerful thing. Community, having a kind of an infrastructure of friends and people who you can rely upon, who can support each other, not just physically and for food and survival, but for emotionally, for connection, for, the higher purposes as well, which is to come together and be able to, go through a period of time where that might occur.
Yes. It's a valid point. The irony about preppers is, nobody really wants to be called a prepper, but if the shit hits the fan, then everybody's like, fuck, I wish I knew a prepper. Because some of you see these shows where these people go all out there. They've got these underground bunkers and all kinds of stuff. And it just seems so ridiculous. But, you guys experienced a situation where, you were cut off from town. You had no resources, but luckily you were able to, you'd already had some systems in place. So you're like, we can chill, we're okay. But if you hadn't, then this is a problem. I had a chat with a friend of mine recently about this. We were kind of talking. I was like, man, maybe I should just make a little kit of some long life food just in case something happens. Because during the COVID stuff, there was a bunch of times when you'd go to the supermarket and the cupboard was bare. And I was just thinking, maybe it would be good to just have something. And he kind of scoffed at it a bit and was like, it's not gonna happen. I was like, well, sure, but what if it does? Because if it does, we're fucked.
I know, exactly. Well, I know people do scoff. Yeah. And, because they don't want to entertain the possibility, the very real possibility that could occur. But look, what does it cost you to just invest in, a certain amount of foods and just in case, It does cost you nothing. Really, it's there. And if it happens, then you'll be very glad you did that.
Yes.
If it doesn't happen, you still got that food you can eat at some point anyway, so you haven't lost a thing. So I think it's just wise to be aware and to see the way that the kind of deep currents and forces and streams that are operating around on a global level today, apart from, like the fiscal crisis that we're in, the environmental crisis, the kind of, the wars that are happening around the world that could engulf the world. In fact, there is that very real possibility. Then with all of these elements, one should at least be aware, and I think to scoff is just is a lack of awareness. To think that everything will remain the same as it always has been is just wishful thinking, because the only thing that is constant on this world is the fact that we change. And at the moment we're in a corridor of rapid change, accelerating change. Yeah.
I go through these phases almost every year where I just am called to watch natural disaster footage on YouTube. And every time I do, like the tsunami footage from Fukushima or that's always it's horrific. It's so confronting to see how quickly things that we have created, cities, are just destroyed.
Absolutely.
And it's so humbling to watch that stuff, and you really makes you realize, we have no idea what we're doing. We think that we think that we're never going to die. We think that
it's a kind of an arrogance.
It's so arrogant, man. Yeah.
Because we think that we can subdue and control and even exploit nature.
Yes.
When something like Fukushima shows you in one event how vulnerable we are and how powerful nature does. All she needs to do is shrug her shoulders and some volcanoes or earthquakes, and massive shifts happen, massive changes. And we are indeed seeing that the whole volcanic ring around the volcanic ring around Asia is activating. I mean, in Italy, that super volcano, forgot the name of it, is rumbling every day. Yesterday, it had something like 300 earthquakes, 300 tremors. Mount St. Helena, also in America, is also rumbling and moving. There is something happening to the planet, and we need to be aware of it. I mean, currently, apart from the X-class flares that we're experiencing from the sun, the North Magnetic Pole, which is currently, up until now, been pretty constant in Canada, is moving at a rate of 80 kilometers a year towards Siberia. That's unprecedented. It's moving, they're shifting, the electromagnetic fields of the planet are changing. There's a thing called the Schumann resonance, which measures the frequency of the Earth. And it's normally at 7.2 hertz, but it's now currently risen to 30, between 30 and 40 hertz. It's changing. Something is happening to our planet. And a lot of the climate change that people say are due to human, intervention, due to fossil fuels and due to, fluorocarbons and fossil fuel, stuff like that. Well, that may have some sort of incremental influence, but it's certainly not the reason why we're going through the changes in climate, because if that were the case, then why are the peaks in Mars, the mountain peaks in Mars, the polar caps also melting? Why is Venus warming up, and so is Mercury? So it's not just planet Earth. The whole solar system is shifting. And what is the common denominator? The sun, of course. Yes. The sun is the the giver of life. And the sun is going through major shifts and changes, as is evidenced by these recent spate of unprecedented X-class coronal mass ejections, which peaked last week, in fact. And it affects what's called the magnetosphere, which is this protective sheath around the Earth, and that gets flattened a lot. So a lot of the cosmic rays, if you like, these highly charged ionized particles, come into the Earth's atmosphere and are shifting and changing, not just the physical part of the Earth, like the geomagnetic balance of the Earth, but also psychically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally on the planet, of the people on the planet, as is evidenced by, if you turn on the news, all kinds of shit is going down on the planet. Everything is being shaken up. Everything is being in turmoil at the moment, and people don't know where to go. People can't believe in politicians anymore. They don't know whether religiously where they're at anymore. Everything is being thrown up for question, and it seems very disconcerting and very worrisome, understandably, for much of the population. However, I see this as a good thing, because I see that the precursor for great transformation on this planet is always that things need to be shaken up. Things need to be uncertain in a certain sense, because that's when we can really move and shift our consciousness. When things are really set, when everybody knows what is real and everybody knows who God is and everyone knows when everything is set, not very good fertile grounds for transformation of consciousness. You can go back to the 50s for an example of that. It started to shift and change in the 60s, but now it's coming to a peak, and it's starting to really, culminate in this accelerating spiral, and it's very disconcerting. I mean, the result of it is all of our darkness, all of our shadow is being brought to the surface to be, dealt with, to be processed, because this shift in consciousness that I believe is happening, it needs these conditions in order for that transformation to occur. So in a kind of a strange sense, it's good that all this is happening, even though it's unsettling and disconcerting. It makes people question everything. It makes people go, well, what really do I want? What if this is all falling apart? What do we want to create? It makes people go more deeply inside, because they can no longer believe in politics or the politicians. Everyone knows that the politicians are full of shit, and that they're just interested in their own electoral base, and that they promise all kinds of things and then break those promises, that they're also subject to graft and corruption and that the world is financially incredibly unstable. It could fall apart at any moment. There's all kinds of crises happening, and it's almost like there's an end game being played out politically, economically, socially, environmentally, religiously, on every level. And it's very disconcerting, but it's also the harbinger of something that could be so amazing, that is unprecedented in our historical process, which I believe is this huge shift in consciousness that is going to occur, that already is occurring, that many of us have already woken up to. But many, many more are yet to awaken. And that is because the whole 100th monkey thing, the whole notion of critical mass, getting a critical mass on the planet so that you get a certain percentage of people who are awake. And then on the natch, many, many more people will start to get it. But this wake-up process is a very challenging thing. It's a very, it's not always sweetness and roses. In fact, the opposite. Yeah, it's very uncomfortable.
The psychology of that, there's that saying, pain is growth, and it's so true. If you are naturally good at something, there's not really any learning going on there. Whereas if you are naturally not good at something and you work and you grind and you become good at something through failure, you know why you're good at something. You have and you've been through pain. It's uncomfortable.
You've put in the hard yards. You've paid your dues.
Yeah, and it's what you were speaking to, the idea of embracing the reality that our worldview is not what we thought it was, is exceptionally painful and frightening and hard to grasp.
Yes.
I certainly have been through that, and I continue to go through that in my life. And, I think a good example that I observed, probably the best example is, I've always kind of been open to conspiracy theories, because guess what? Some of them aren't theories. A lot of them are bullshit. Some of them are real. To dismiss all of them, I mean, that's just as nutty as believing that they're all true.
Throwing out the baby with the bathwater, isn't it?
That's it. Some of them aren't theories. So I've always tried to have one foot in, one foot out. Keep a rational mind. Go, okay, I'll listen to your story. Yeah, let's the Earth's flat. Is it? Okay, tell me why you think that. Let's hear it. And then go, yeah, look, that's not, the argument isn't compelling enough to me. But
I don't resonate with that or whatever, but you're welcome to your point of view.
Yeah. And I think the best example of that was the most recent thing with the COVID stuff and the vaccine stuff. I've been skeptical enough of that system to go, I don't like this. This doesn't smell right. Doesn't pass the sniff test. I'm not gonna get this. I'm not gonna get this injection. And the more homework I did, the more justified I felt in that. But the more society around me vilified me for feeling that way.
That's right.
And I tried to have conversations with people, providing them with a lot of rational information that is honestly pretty hard to dispute. And now mainstream is coming out that all that stuff is true. But at the time, I was faced so often from friends and family with my mind's made up, don't confuse me with facts. It was kind of that that attitude, you know, and it was
very much so.
Yeah, too confronting. And I get it, because when I watched a documentary with my wife, and she's very open. She doesn't go down the rabbit hole though, like I do. She listens to me, and she kind of rolls her eyes, and then ends up being like, "Fuck, you make a good point. All right, fine. I don't want to do this, but I have." It's hard. Eventually, she's like, I think you're right." Usually, sometimes I'm wrong. I was wrong once in the 90s, but that's a different story. But we watched a documentary recently. It was actually towards the end of the COVID stuff, and she was like, "Can we turn this off?" She's like, "I can't. This is really rocking me. It's too much. It's making me." She felt very uncomfortable about the things that she'd learned about the world and the systems that we think are taking care of us that are really not, and about the control that these systems really have over us, and just the lies that we're told. And it was really, really uncomfortable. And I get it, because I've been through that too, and it's awful to go, hang on a minute, the people that are saying that they have my best interest at heart, these companies that are providing products that are medicines that are meant to make me better, are lying?
Yes.
What?
I know.
You know, hang on. It's like, but this is not the world that I live in, right? I'm taken care of by mummy and daddy, whoever, you know, we put that childlike mentality onto.
Faith. Into our priests, politicians, doctors, lawyers, all that sort of thing.
That's it. That's a great, I mean, faith is the perfect word for it, because having your faith broken, it fucking kills, man. It's like a death.
It's awful. Yeah. It's the extreme abandonment, really, when you realize you can't trust someone who you thought was trustworthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can't really force that, because it's what's the saying? It's much easier to convince someone. What is it? Easier to convince someone that they've been lied to than. Fuck, I can't get it right. Anyway, but people, it's
the gist.
Yeah, people just they can't. It's so hard to embrace it. They can embrace it, and they are embracing it slowly but surely, and faster than they ever have, it seems. But it's a process, man. And what you were talking about before, it's shocking, because then I think you feel so unsafe, and when you start to go, okay, so what is my place in the world? What is the world around me if it's not what I thought it was?
And that's the positive thing that comes out of it, is the re-questioning. It's questioning authority, and then looking, okay, if I can't trust the outside authority, then where else to look but within?
Yeah.
And this is the point. We're shifting our identity from, you know, like looking out into the world and thinking, tell me how to live my life. Tell me what the rules are. Give me the handbook about how I should live my life. Because we've been kind of as a human collective, in a kind of a childlike state where we have been looking to mummy and daddy to make sure that everything is okay. And those mummy and daddy being particularly the priests and the politicians. They're the ones who've kind of handmade our reality map as we've been born into it. And now it's a very, very good thing. It's almost like we're in a state of puberty. And, you know, like we're going, well, how do you know, Mum? Or how do you know, Dad? And can I really trust him? And no, bugger you. No, I'm not doing that. You know, it's a really dynamic process, and it's painful. And, you know, like things shift. And if you look at the planet, what we were just talking about before, the whole planet seems to be going through this. I mean, you've got volcanoes going off, like the pimples you have when if you look at the planet as one being, and the weather changes, what's weather if not emotional changes?
Yes. The earth is going through some hormonal changes. Yes,
exactly. It's going through all the sexuality is starting to happen. You're questioning authority. This is a major shift in human consciousness, and it's akin. One can, you know, usefully use the metaphor of going through puberty, where for a couple of years everything is really rocky and really, it's a mess until we come through the other side and we take our rightful place as a conscious person, an adult, and we redefine our relationship to our parents, to ourselves and to the world at large. And I think this is ultimately an amazing thing, of course. But when you're in it, it's very rocky. Yeah. And to refer back to what you were saying earlier, I mean, it's testament to your sovereignty, to the fact that you're already waking up and have awoken, that you questioned that about the jab, because so many people who I consider to be very, very intelligent, still bought that whole line, because they were still in the whole notion, believing the notion that they must know better, they must know best. But anyone who did the research had to come to the conclusion this is completely untested, unverified. It's actually not a vaccine. It's an mRNA injection. Therefore, how can you even call it a vaccine? Because it's not a vaccine. It's something else. You take
red flag straight away.
Exactly. And so, like anybody who dared to question it had to come to the conclusion that this is not in my best interests. And I just refer to say no. I just say I do not consent. Yeah. But when you said, I do not consent, suddenly you had all of the rest of the collective going, oh, that's really wrong. You're actually really holding us all back. You're not supporting the community because you could be active and you could be giving me the virus, and all of this really deep, unconscious kind of projections that started to be put out as a result of not dealing or not taking responsibility for that self-awareness or taking self-responsibility, where you go, I'm going to be the arbiter of what goes into my body, not some outside person. Yeah. And if that doesn't feel right to me, I reserve the right to say, no, thank you very much. But taking that stance of no, thank you very much brought a lot of censure.
So much heat, man. And the irony is too that the thing that made it even more frustrating was the heat that we got was completely irrational. It was completely emotional and irrational. Emotions are fine, but the lack of logic behind it just was. It's like, again,
there's a great guy called Matthias Desmet. He's
I've heard a few podcasts
professor
with him,
of I think it's Antwerpen University in Belgium. Yeah. Who came up with this idea called mass formation.
Yes.
And mass formation we've evidenced in the past. I mean, it happened in Nazi Germany. It happened around Stalin. It happens around wherever people become sort of pretty much brainwashed. It's also happening in Israel, because I've got a lot of Israeli friends, but you can see a mass formation occurring there too, as they buy the party line in order to justify the incredible slaughter of innocent men and women and children. One needs to go, oh my God, I've got to believe these things, or else how do I live with it? And that process is called mass formation. It could be rephrased as saying it's race hypnosis. It's a kind of an agreed kind of like belief system that allows you to justify or rationalize behavior that you normally would never agree to, you know, and this is so prevalent in our world today, and was very markedly evidenced during the COVID crisis and the whole notion of what happened around the jab. So we're living with this reality of mass formation, and of course the mass media, mainstream media, has been complicit in supporting that kind of a role and narrative of like constantly, you know, during COVID, telling you how many more people have died, how many beds are available, constantly telling you. It's like hypnosis. It's let's just call it what it is. It was hypnosis. And I'm a hypnotherapist, so I recognize it immediately. You know, I'm a trained psychologist, so, you know, it was very evident to me. And Matthias Desmet, I actually got to meet the man at a conference in Europe. And he got massive kickback from, you know, putting that out from his colleagues and from, you know, his peers. But nowadays, everyone's coming going, my God, you're speaking the truth. And everyone can start to see it. And that in itself, which you rightly pointed out earlier, is a barometer of change that we're in. Where in 2020, all these people, you know, as you say, all these so-called conspiracy theories came out, have now been shown, yes, they were conspiracies, but they are far from being theories. Yes. Many of them were conspiracy facts. Yes. You know, as is evidenced today. I mean, Pfizer have now had to pull back, or AstraZeneca, one of them, on their vaccine, their so-called vaccine, the mRNA jab, because they're saying, oh, yeah, it has had side effects. We are pulling it off now. Oh, hello. You're doing that after you've inoculated millions, if not billions of people. And now you're saying, oh, it's dangerous and you're pulling it off the market?
Yeah.
Hello, where's the accountability? Where's the responsibility? Oh, no, but you agreed to take it.
Yeah,
it was you agreed.
Fuck, man.
You know, I mean, and they have been totally indemnified from any legal kind of like lawsuit.
And
they're absolutely indemnified. They did that before they released the jab.
And there was something where they were getting something passed that they didn't want to release any of the information for 75 years or something like
that.
That's
correct.
There was something about.
Fortunately, that was overturned.
Yeah, but
that was what they wanted to do.
For me,
exactly. How dodgy is that?
It's like, hang on a minute.
If you can't be transparent and you can't be honest, then why should I put something into my bodily fluids that you don't want to talk about, that you want to be indemnified for, and that you don't want any statistics to be known about for another 75 to 80 years? Hello.
How is that not the biggest, not a reason for
scam, the biggest lie, the biggest heist, the biggest con trip that has ever been laid upon humanity?
And then to like, that's a pretty rational conclusion that we are coming to listen to that information and go, I'm skeptical, and then to be vilified for being skeptical of that. That's when you're like, am I going crazy? Is this what's happening? Am I the one? Have I lost my shit? Or is there actually mass psychosis going on? And that's
quite right. It's like, you're being vilified for exercising your sovereignty.
Yeah.
You're saying, no, thank you. It's not for me. Oh, that must mean you're the, this, you're an anti-vax, you're a threat to society.
Yeah.
You're, contaminating all of the garbage.
Yeah. And you're racist
I had to go through, in a certain sense, as a collective. Anyone who refused to take the jab was in some way or another lumped into that kind of category,
Yeah. It's something about that mass psychosis that I've always, that made a lot of sense to me when I listened to Matthias Desmet talk about. One of the examples he used was Nazi Germany.
That's right.
And what do we think of when, as in society, if we talk about Nazis? Well, evil, right? We just think, the Nazis were evil. But when you really think about that, there were a lot of people who identified as Nazis. Were every single one of those people that were once a little baby evil people? Like, my wife does a true crime podcast, and we spoke to a woman yesterday who she told a story about this guy who this woman went backpacking in New Zealand, and she went out on a date with this guy and he murdered her. And he's got some real problems because he tried to do this to a few other people. That guy you could characterize as evil, but you can't characterize an entire these are thousands and thousands of people who were convinced that what they were doing was right. And that
in itself is an example of gross mass formation, just as the events that happened in Nazi Germany were an example of mass formation.
Yeah.
So it's like one doing to the other what the other did in the first place that the other was being demonized for. We're doing the same thing to them. In fact, in the very demonization, we are doing the same act of mass formation upon those people. Yeah. And the thing is that you've got to remember, Mark, that history is always written by the conquerors.
Yes.
The underdog doesn't write the history books.
No, we can
so the conquerors are always going to put themselves, and they're always going to demonize the others. Yeah. And so they'll demonize Nazi Germany. Now, German people, I've been to Germany, they're beautiful people, they're good people, and they weren't, as you say, all evil. They were, in fact, having been subjugated under the First World War and subjugated to all kinds of sanctions and strictures and financial, strictures to such a degree that someone like Hitler could take the place because Hitler suddenly took them out of the red into the black economically. So that's why he became such a hero. He was even pictured on 1939 as the front face of Time magazine. He was being lauded as having created an economic miracle. And that's why when he had the Olympic Games there, he was actually, people around the world admired him because he took Germany out of the red into the black economically, made it a prosperous nation within just a number of years. But then, of course, when the war happened, exactly the opposite happened. Suddenly he was the demon. He was no longer the the best boy on the block, the new boy on the block. But this is just all testament to how quickly we can change the kind of way we view someone by this kind of like mass psychosis, this hypnosis, where we all collectively agree that someone is evil or bad.
Yes.
When actually you have to take it into your heart that most people on the planet are probably doing the best that they can.
Yeah, absolutely.
I doubt if there's a really evil person, let's just really make the world really fuck it up, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, most people, whether we agree with them or not, are probably trying to do what they believe to be right.
Of course.
And we have to at least extend them that kind of, license, because I do believe that people are inherently good. But I mean, of course, people in thinking that they're doing good can often do bad. There's the old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
And so it goes. That's our humanness. But having said that, I think that, to vilify or to demonize people just because of, because sadly, it's a thing that goes on and on and on. It's like victim and perpetrator.
Yeah.
Now, I have so many of my dearest friends are Israelis. I'm surrounded by Israelis, but I cannot condone what is happening with the Israeli government right now. And just because my friends are Israelis doesn't mean I condone what the Israeli government does. And isn't it interesting that the Jews were subjected to the Holocaust by the Nazis in the 40s, and now what happens is they were the victim then, and the Nazis were the perpetrators. And, there's that endless cycle of victim and perpetrator, as is evidenced so much by sexual abuse, where the victims become the abusers later on, unless forgiveness happens. Forgiveness is the magic which can dissolve that awful loop of victim and perpetrator. But sadly, that has not occurred and doesn't look like it's even in the near close to occurring in the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so now you see that the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians what was done to them in the Second World War. Now they are the perpetrators, and now somebody new, the Palestinians are the victims. And I predict that unless the Palestinians are careful and they regroup, it could be in some years' time that they become the perpetrators unless forgiveness occurs. Forgiveness is the only thing that can cut through the unholy loop of victim and perpetrator, as we've seen in sexual abuse, in all kinds of abuse, really, and certainly in the case of these world events where, a Holocaust was unleashed upon the Jews, and now a Holocaust is being unleashed upon the Palestinians. And I'm not judging anybody here. I'm just calling a spade and just seeing what's happening. So we can see the recurrence of these mass formation, of this kind of like mass psychosis happening when the deep issues of our common humanity are ignored, in fact, buried, where universal principles, where all beings have the right to basic rights, like, food, shelter, water, allowed to live their life in the best way they can with dignity and peace, and to be able to follow whatever inspires them in terms of their religious pursuit. These things are being completely ignored, and not only ignored, but, actively like spat upon on the global, and not just in the Middle East. It's happening in Sudan, it's happening in Ukraine, it's happening in so many other places on the planet that don't even make their way into the news. Like what's happening in Sudan is appalling, even worse than what's happening in the Middle East. But we just don't hear about that because it's just not so important, because, after all, it's just a black African country, and they're not as important as white people who live in the Middle East, who happen to be, have a lot of power. So anyway, I think that we're facing this, and I think this is part of the transformation of consciousness that we're going through, that for any transformation to occur, one needs to dredge up the unconscious, dredge up. We need to face squarely in the eye our darkness, the shadow that has been unconsciously perpetrated where man's inhumanity to man. And this has to be seen in the light of day by the vast majority of people as a way of where the horror and the awful, the horrific situation that we can see on the news today can at least in its best aspect be a wake-up call for people to go, enough. stop this. This is ridiculous. This is completely against all natural, human, and universal law, and quite patently so. And this is what is happening to people. There's a waking up process through this, having to witness something really, really horrific. And I think that that's really what's happening. We're having to face these lower dense frequencies and vibrations in order to purge them, in order to become aware of them and to consciously let them go. Because where we're going as a collective, we can't take these really dense frequencies with us. We need to karmically deal with them right now because we are going through a massive shift. And as I alluded to earlier, I believe that the sun is one of the great orchestrators of this massive shift. It's happening on every level, on the physical, emotional, the spiritual, the intellectual, the psychic, on every level across the board. Yeah.
Do you think that a shift in consciousness like this, like what you're talking about is a fascinating phenomenon, that cycle of abuse, how an abusee can very well become an abuser. Do you think that there are many folks who have had no history of abuse will become an abuser? Or do you think it's more so, it's almost always coming from someone who has had some kind of abuse themselves?
I believe that's the latter to be the case. Yes,
I do too, I think.
I think that any person who's wholesome, who hasn't suffered that kind of abuse, it wouldn't even occur to you to want to perpetrate that upon somebody else.
Yeah.
Like I know in my line of work, I've come across a lot of sexual abuse, and particularly of child abuse, where it comes up in the work that I do, where it comes to the surface that certain individuals were abused as a young child and now find themselves unconsciously attracted to doing that themselves because there was because most abuse, there's a kind of an anchoring or a bonding to that abuse, even though it's certainly really, really negative. Like someone who might be sexually abused, a trauma bond, but also that there's often pleasure and pain associated with it. So there's also pleasure with the pain.
It's been wired incorrectly.
Exactly. Great example. It's an incorrect wiring. And I think that if you have natural wiring,
yes,
it would be, you couldn't live with yourself if you did that. How could you do that?
Yes.
But if you've been incorrectly wired, you can have what they call, again, Matthias Desmond, have different platforms. There's this often a disassociated part of your personality that can be activated, that can do these things, and later on you can go into denial from a conscious point of view and shove it into the unconscious, and where your conscious mind doesn't have to deal with that.
But your unconscious is calling the shots.
And I think that when people suffer trauma, there's often a disassociation that occurs, what they call in psychology a platform. And this is what's called this is the case with people who suffer from multiple personality disorder, or from there are various other milder versions of that, like borderline personality disorder, where there are certain parts of the consciousness which are not always available to the conscious sense of self, sense of ego, sense of personality. I've even in my own personal relationships where I've been with partners who have been abused in that way, and I've seen that platform, how that happens, and how that can be segregated into a part of the consciousness where it's not having to be conscious, where it's put into the unconscious. So I believe that this is a result of this incorrect wiring that you're talking about, and it's a very good metaphor.
Well, it makes it. I mean, if it's happened when a child is forming, their wiring isn't complete, so that would make sense that that's when it would happen. And I know that through psychedelics we are able to. I know that psilocybin, for sure. I'm not sure if other compounds do. They probably do. They do grow new neural pathways. So that sounds to me like new wiring. Hence why, from my experience with psychedelics, I came out a different person. I came out self-aware and was able to see myself and my place in the world. And that to me sounds like a way for people to kind of reroute some of these things that may be a little fucked up in their psyche, whether it's a physical or it's just an energetic thing. But and again, the other thing is you were talking about forgiveness and going into the unconscious and the shadow. That's man, I don't know about you, but personally, consciously working on my shadow has been the hardest endeavor that I've ever stepped into, and I think it's an endless pursuit. But psychedelics are, from my experience, something that is like forced shadow work. For me, like
you're right on the money,
yeah,
Mark.
it's there.
You're right on the pulse with all of that. And there's something I'd like to comment about that, and that is that I started using psychedelics when I was 17. I'm 71 now, and they've been a lifelong spiritual pursuit. I've had a spiritual relationship with psychedelics since I was 17, and the thing is that for a lot of my life, I was demonized for that. I've even been arrested for that, because I'm a devotee of ayahuasca, and I got arrested for, for using ayahuasca, some 12 years ago. And I had to go through that whole demonization. And yet now, as we talked about before, the whole world is now catching up where they're realizing that psychedelics have this immense potential to create wholeness, to heal past life, not just this life trauma, but past life trauma, to reprogram, deprogram, and reprogram the human biocomputer, to give access, real-time immersions into higher states of consciousness that can dissolve and, dissolve trauma and dissolve negative wiring. It can rewire. Absolutely, it can rewire the brain. And, I've been committed to this type of healing for, 50 years. And I've only seen absolutely wonderful results, And unfortunately now, thank goodness, that society is starting to catch up with us now. And we're starting to see not only the lack of demonization of it now, but like an actually embracing of things like, when I was younger, I used marijuana. It was the demon weed. It made you go, go onto heroin, and it was the precursor to all this
and other facts
bad
like
shit that happened. Yeah. And now it's being used as medical. Now the meme is medical marijuana.
Yeah. What a turnaround.
LSD and mushrooms gave you deformed children. It changed. It buggered your DNA. It made you jump out of windows, look at the sun, and go blind. Now, now that has been changed around, where suddenly you have psilocybin clinics in Switzerland, Holland, or throughout the United States.
Healing trauma.
I'm in touch with most of the people who are on the forefront of, inducting these new modalities into the society in a legal way, with legal dispensation. So suddenly we're seeing the turnaround. And I'm happy to say we're seeing the awakening and the maturing of human psychology, of the collective human psychology, but especially within the realms of the medical department, where these substances, these sacred substances, these psychedelics were heretofore demonized and condemned, are now being embraced as the bona fide healing agents that they truly are. And I've been dedicated to working with these substances for, as I say, 50 years. And I can tell you, I've only seen really amazing results when these substances are used in the correct way and with the kind of respect and the responsibility that they rightly deserve. As with anything else, if it's abused, it can cause harm. Any instrument, any technology, if it's abused, can cause harm. And this is a very powerful technology that needs the greatest respect and a lot of training and the right mindset to approach these substances.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you obviously, you know your shit when it comes to this. And that's from my experiences. I say this to anyone who's ever talked about it, is it's like, this is the fact that that psychedelics are in the same category as other drugs.
Well, heroin and, crack cocaine
meth.
And, meth. I mean.
Well, that forces them to be used in that way. because an unconscious person just lumps them in the same category because that's kind of the category that we're told that they belong in, which is just such an injustice because that is, from my experience and people that I know, not from my personal experience, I've always been respectful of them when I've used them, but people that I know taking psychedelics when they don't have their set and setting sorted out, they don't know anything about that. They're going to some fucking random party or a rave with all these strangers that they don't know. They're not with people that they trust. They don't know how much they're taking. They don't know what they're taking. They just want to get fucked up. And I'm always like, man, that's a good luck. That's
basically irresponsible. Yeah. And that's the wrong way to approach it.
And they will kick your ass. And that's where, as you know, you will have a terrible experience. And to say that is what the experience is and only that is just so untrue. It's just such an injustice.
Set and setting are the most important aspects of using these substances. And set refers to the mindset that you bring. So that means the state of mind, what you're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Or to the equation.
How you feel about your life. Yeah.
What's going on inside of you. And setting refers to the physical environment with which you ingest these substances. And of course, you know, like a friend of mine, Dr. Rick Strassman, wrote a book called DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and he was the first one who was given legal dispensation by the DEA and other governmental organizations to conduct research upon DMT, which is on Schedule 1, like with heroin, crack cocaine, all of those things. And so he was allowed to do this, but he was only allowed to do this within the confines of a hospital, where you've got, you know, antiseptic an environment, you know, clattering
not
carts going past. No, it's not what you'd call a good setting. But at least he was able to do it there, and you know, people volunteered, and they were undergoing you know, experiments with taking DMT within that environment, and they all came back and said, yeah, it was an amazing experience, but I'd rather do this in a garden. I'd rather be with friends and people where I felt warm and connected and held and nurtured. And in the end of his book, he said, look, this has been an amazing research, but I would say that the ideal conditions within which this should be done is within a natural environment with people who are not dressed up in white lab coats and, you know, instruments everywhere, which, of course, influence the psychic atmosphere of what you experience while you are ingesting these substances. And DMT, after all, is across the board in nature. It exists everywhere. It exists in us, in our pineal gland, the cerebrospinal fluid, in our blood. It's responsible for our dream activity at night. It's in the telluric realms, in the mineral realms. It's in the vegetable realms. Many trees and plants contain it. It's in the insect realms. It's in most animals contain it also, because it's intimately involved in the involution of consciousness after a conception into the fetus. And it's also involved in the release of consciousness at the point of death. Because as Dr. Rick Strassman described in his book, they've done experiments, and even after clinical death, the pineal gland is squeezing out this rich cocktail of tryptamines and beta-carbolines, that is DMT and phenylaline and 5-MeO-DMT, all of which are held within the pineal gland for up to 3 days after clinical death. And many people who've had post-death experiences or near-death experiences have all claimed, as we've classically heard, about the tunnel and the light and seeing their friends and relatives and beautiful feeling of love, being immersed in love. This is due to the extrusion of these tryptamines that are kept, this safe treasure in the pineal gland. And the pineal gland, by most doctors, think it's a superfluous gland. I think it's like not really necessary, because they say the pituitary gland is the master gland which controls all the other glands, and indeed it is. But the pineal gland is the spiritual gland. It's the one that connects us to the invisible realms, to the realms beyond this 3D space-time reality and beyond this physical, material reality that we interact with on a daily basis. So it opens up the more spiritual realms, you could say the psychic or the spiritual realms. And so now, of course, with all of this new research, which I've been intimately involved with, it's all changing. Psilocybin is being recognized as being the great healing agent that it is, as is ayahuasca, as is most of the psychedelics, in fact, even LSD, which is made in the laboratory by, Hoffman. It's done amazing healing in its time, but it's also been misused, and people can have bad experiences if they don't take care for the absolutely essential precepts of set and setting. But as these things start to become more and more in the focus of the general public awareness, and it's being divested of all of this taboo and all of these wrong notions and wrong beliefs and wrong kind of like understandings about these substances, because there's been a lot of fear around these healing sacraments. Slowly, we're growing up to the point where we can not only consider these things as being amazing tools for transformation and healing, but to actively start to integrate and use them within our medical system. And I've got friends who are at the Zurich University right now who are looking at producing kind of an ayahuasca brew that comes in just drops, like homeopathic drops, where they want to put that into the medical system of Europe, so that if you feel that there's something you need to deal with on a kind of a spiritual level or even on a physical level, then, or an illness or a psychological illness or a physical illness, then a doctor could prescribe that you go into a certain room, that there'll be a guide there who's trained to assist in these matters, and that you could be administered these things, and that you could go through that experience for 2 to 3 hours within that room, as is currently being done with psilocybin in Switzerland and in other places.
Wow.
And that is being legally sanctioned and embraced by the existing medical system structures. This is starting to occur. It's not yet fully, manifested, but this is what's in the pipeline, so to speak. And so finally, as we grow in our awareness, these wonderful sacraments that have been used since time immemorial as agents of transformation in all of the great high societies that we've known about, in the Egyptian mystery schools, in the Mithraic mystery schools of Persia,
it's everywhere, in
the Eleusinian mystery schools of Greece, Soma cults in Indus Valley in north of India. I could go on and on. And they've been always used, and often by very high cultures, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, the Mayans, the Inca, all of whom were very advanced civilizations, were all using these substances for the spiritual health of the people. And it's only us, our culture, that has demonized these substances. And why? Because we've been predominantly identified with the male dominator, left brain, rational, sequential, causal part of our consciousness, whilst demonizing, or at least, not allowing the right brain, which is the more holographic, the more, it's the more poetic, the more sort of like spiritual aspects of our consciousness. We haven't really given credence to that. But that imbalance is being redressed right now. And I see that as being the demonization of women too. All things feminine were demonized. Women only got the vote in the last century. In 20th century, and now women, as the whole rise of the divine feminine is happening, as was evidenced in the 60s with women's liberation, feminism, and the extrapolation of all of that that's happened since. Similarly, we're seeing that these substances like mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, cactus, are actually essentially feminine in nature. Why are they feminine in nature? Because they dissolve boundaries. They dissolve the strict definitions that we in our classical, rational, scientific, materialistic way of viewing things have always seen things as being in blocks and sort of identifiable objects. This is all being dissolved right now. We're going, no, but more than that, who are we? What is consciousness? And science, as we know it, is still yet to admit the presence of consciousness. And because they can't measure it, see it, touch it, they think it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They can't say, but quantum physics, of course, quantum mechanics is redressing this imbalance and is changing the board completely. And I believe that science and mysticism, which heretofore have traveled parallel paths, are now starting to converge. So we're seeing the radical synthesis of both science and spirituality. And I believe that this will form the basis of the new paradigm upon which the whole new awareness of how we can live together as human beings and the whole new science that will emerge out of that will be what we will inherit in the new earth. But first, we need to address all these dark shadow that we've been in. And as you rightly referred to before, ayahuasca and these wonderful psychedelic sacraments have to address the shadow. We need to look at the shadow. We need to embrace the shadow. It's not just about being a better version of ourselves. It's about making conscious that which has heretofore been unconscious. And ayahuasca, psilocybin, and cactus are excellent, par excellence, at bringing that which is yet unconscious into the light of awareness for our loving attention.
Yeah.
Bringing it into, oh my goodness, I also have a killer in me. I can't just blame that upon this group or that person. I have to take responsibility that as part of the human collective, I also have this. And I need to heal that and acknowledge it and bring it into the light of awareness myself. And in so doing, by healing myself, I am naturally, on the natch, healing the collective at large. So we don't need to tinker with the nuts and bolts of society out there. We need to change and tweak the software within us. And in so doing, we naturally allow for the possibility of the human collective being healed. And this is what these plants, these sacraments, these psychedelics have come into the collective awareness of the Western psyche to do. Precisely that. At this very important juncture in our evolutionary push.
It's fascinating to me that these compounds, these psychedelic compounds, are almost all just completely natural. You know, mushrooms, they just grow out of cow shit. Yet we live in a society that tries to make that illegal. It's like well, how? I mean, if you know where to go, they grow. The earth gives them to us. And this idea that we are separate from the earth, not of the earth, I think it helps us to create that taboo feeling we have around things like psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca DMT and the cactus and even cannabis. But where do the fact that they are just provided for us is so intriguing to me. Where do you think we got into this path where as a society we demonized these natural things? Like how did that transfer happen? Because if you listen, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of Terence McKenna, you may have even met Terence in your time, I don't know.
He was the one who initiated me into ayahuasca.
That's fucking amazing, man.
Yeah.
Man, the amount of Terence that I've listened to is
brilliant, man.
Brilliant.
Wonderful man. Amazing raconteur and just one of the most awake people I've ever met.
Yeah, wow. So when did you meet Terence?
When I was first started becoming interested in ayahuasca, I was part of a study group in the early 90s where with a bunch of other people who were interested, had the same interest, we were gathering all the information. We were getting books and, listening to Terence McKenna talks. We were like studying the history and the usage of this sacrament. But we didn't actually have access to it at that point. But in one of these meetings, which I held at my place, one of the people said, "Why don't we just invite Terence here instead of listening to his talks?" And I said, "Oh no, he's probably far too busy. Like surely, he's a very busy man. He's got conferences everywhere. We're just a small group of about 9 people." And one of the people in the group said, "Well, I met him at Esalen Institute. Maybe I should just flick him an email." I said, "Yeah, do it." And so he said to Terence, "Listen, would you come and, talk to our group and blah, 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 blah." And Terence wrote back and said, "What? Australia, the land of the acacias, the famed acacia tree. He said, absolutely, would love to come. And so within a short amount of time, within a couple of months, he was here staying at my place. And that, of course, he then went on to do a national tour around all of the major cities. But it began with us in Byron Bay, and we set up a very firm friendship. He'd been a hero of mine. I'd read all of his books, and but suddenly we were becoming friends. And so he started sending me in the mail these beautiful bottles of the best medicine you could possibly ever imagine. It was his own very own brew.
Fuck, man, if you're getting a care package from Terence, it's going to be some good stuff.
Exactly. And, he would have these little lines on the bottle going, standard dose and heroic dose.
Proceed with caution.
Caution, exactly. And so I was able to liberally experiment upon myself for about 2 years. And then I felt fully called by this medicine. It was just undeniable and I'd had already almost a lifetime's experience with psychedelics. And so I then was called to go to South America. I went to Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, and studied with various shamans from various traditions, various ayahuasca traditions, the rest. And after some time of many years of being with these people, these healers, I started doing retreats and ceremonies myself. I was empowered to do that. But Terence was the one who was really the first one, my first maestro, the first one to provide me with the brew, and with which I had most of my deep downloads. Because when you do ayahuasca and you feel called by it to be a practitioner or a distributor of this medicine, you do what's called a dieta, and a dieta means you go under very strict conditions. You have to stop all sexuality. You have to be on a very, very strict diet, like just rice and plantains, which are very like these green bananas, which are just boiled or roasted.
How long is this? Is this for?
Can be very, the minimum of 2 weeks. But can be anything up to 3 months. Can even be up to a year.
Wow!
My very first time I did it for 3 months, and during that 3 months, I was taking it every day or every second day. This is about now like some 30 years ago.
Wow!
And I was drinking every day and having massive downloads in every session that I was doing. And then once I started giving it to people, all those downloads stopped.
Really?
And I was just like almost being super present. Even though I was drinking it, it wasn't distorting or changing my reality other than to be present for other people.
It's like your role had changed.
Yes, and also that you're dealing with a sentient other. It's not a drug. A drug is defined by, I've used drugs. Like I was a smoker at one stage. I've drunk alcohol. There are other drugs I've used. And what I've noticed is that the characteristics of any drug is the longer you use it, the more you need of it to get to the same place that you initially got to.
Yes. But
like
not
I
with
know heroin addicts.
Right?
Yeah. No, not with psychedelics at all, and not with ayahuasca.
It's kind of the opposite.
Even today I go, here I go again. Here's the glass. Okay, you ready? It's not like, hey, give me that glass of ayahuasca. I need my hit.
Yeah.
Not at all.
No.
Couldn't be further from the truth. And the other thing is that when you take drugs, you build up a tolerance to them. You need more and more and more. It's called tolerance. Over the years, the 30 years that I've been taking ayahuasca, I need less and less and less. I need hardly to take any, and suddenly it opens up in the same way that it used to from doing a heroic dose. So what happens is, what I notice from my own experience is that it opens up these neural pathways in the frontal lobes of the brain. And once you walk these pathways, once they've been activated and opened up, it's not reliant or dependent upon drinking the ayahuasca to keep opening them up. Once they're open, they're open. The ayahuasca is just there to open these pathways. That's why we call the ayahuasca a teacher. It's a teacher plant, and we refer to it as the mother, because the mother always has your best interest in heart. She'll tickle you with a feather when that's good and just give you boundless love. But if you need to be disciplined, she'll cuff you and go, hey, stop that stupid behavior. You're pissing away your energy. Look at it. This is what you're doing. Here, come back. And that's what ayahuasca also does. And so once you develop a really deep relationship with that sacrament, very quickly you learn to trust it. Very quickly you know that this plant is a sentient other. It is an intelligent other. It is it is a high intelligence from the plant realms. And just as you referred to earlier, and just as we use nature, if we use the trees to build houses or to make paper, we use plants and vegetables to eat. We use herbs and substances from the natural plant world to sustain ourselves on every level. But there are certain plants that also nurture and nourish us on a spiritual level. And these master plants, as we refer to them, like ayahuasca, like the acacia tree, like, the mushrooms, like the cactus, San Pedro or the peyote, are master plants. They are teacher plants. They teach you how to live. They dissolve negative traumas by purging them out of you, like a mini catharsis. And then they reprogram to create new healthy neural pathways that will benefit you. Now, let me give you an example. When in Brazil, about 25, 30 years ago, when there are a number of churches, Christian churches, I might add, who were petitioning to have ayahuasca to be used as their sacrament within their rituals, within their mass or whatever, the government was still saying, no, these are illegal substances due to the pressure of the American government. Having said that on a global scale, they then said, oh, no, but this is our intellectual property. People here in Brazil, have been using this for thousands of years as a healing modality. So then the Brazil government said, okay, let's do an experiment. We'll set up a process. And so they had all these psychiatrists, doctors, lawyers, people who are professionals to set up a panel to observe a group of people who are using ayahuasca on a weekly basis, and to watch also a control group who were not using ayahuasca. And they did this process for 8 years. And after 8 years, they noticed that the group who were drinking ayahuasca became much better integrated into their society, became genuinely good, caring human beings, stopped doing hard drugs like alcohol or crack or cocaine or any hard drug, genuinely became caring, loving people and wanted to help and assist others. Meanwhile, the study group, the control group, there was no visible change. They were carrying on with the same habits, the same kind of lifestyle that they were originally doing, maybe with some individual changes, but on the whole, very little. So they decided to take it off the opium law, which is what their law was, saying opium plus all these other drugs are illegal, and to make it sanction it to be legally used in a ceremonial sense by these eclectic Christian churches like the Santo Daime, like the União de Vegetal, like the Barquinia. These are all 3 churches in Brazil that use ayahuasca as their sacrament. And not only that, but the really vindicating element of this study was that most of the people who were on the board, on the panel, conducting this study, all became ayahuasqueros. They all started to use ayahuasca. So that was the really vindicating factor. And, I've been using it for 30 years, and I attribute my good health. I'm 71 years of age, and I have absolutely no health issues. And I expect to be that way for a long time, because I believe that any negative impacts upon my health, whether they be psychic or emotional or mental or physical, are dealt with in this process of drinking the medicine. And I feel I've been giving it to, well, I guess if I want to be really honest, tens of thousands of people in my time. I've traveled all through Europe, America, and around Australia dispensing this medicine, and I don't mind saying so now, because I know that there've only been really positive results. Having said that, I don't think people should just rush off to anybody who's giving ayahuasca, because one needs to be deeply trained. One needs to know exactly if you're going to a practitioner, it's not like, oh, he's got ayahuasca. You first need to go, who is this person? Do I trust this person? Do I feel a resonance with them? And if there's yes, 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 then by all means drink with that person. But if there's any feeling of, I don't know where they're coming from and who is this person, I wouldn't do it.
Forget it.
Because there's too many people out there who can just know how to throw two plants together, but they don't really have the maturity or the understanding or the knowledge within themselves to really be in a position to conduct ceremony. So I would say for people who are interested in doing this, be careful to check out whoever the practitioner is. But apart from that, the medicine used in the right way is an amazing boon for human beings. It's had thousands and thousands of years of interfacing with the human organism. And so any bugs that were in the software, so to speak, were ironed out a long time ago because this medicine has no toxic effect whatsoever. It has no side effects. It doesn't leave you with any hangover. Even if you've had a challenging experience facing your shadow throughout a session, you will feel fantastic the next day. It has a natural antidepressant effect. You will feel good. You will feel just in a really present, lovely, present and in a position of being service to others. So it has only good effects. There are no bad effects that I've noticed over these years if it's conducted and dispensed in the correct way and in the right context.
Now, this, just to be clear, this doesn't mean that one may not have a terrifying experience throughout the journey, which it can be quite common, but that doesn't mean that's not necessary, and that doesn't mean that you don't come out the other side with the lessons from that experience, correct?
Correct. We were just talking about the shadow and how important it is to address the shadow.
Yeah.
And how important it is to bring
is.
what is exactly and while it's on the unconscious, it's running us surreptitiously. It's running us without our being aware of it. You know, and all of our choices, all of our fear-based, what we do and what we don't do, what we're afraid to do, what we're not, what we're brave enough. You know, like basically it's like Carl Jung's notion of individuation, where one had to confront the shadow and assimilate it into and become whole. So we're not into becoming perfect as human beings. We're into becoming whole. That's where the whole notion of being holy comes from. You know, and I think that what ayahuasca does is it facilitates the integration of the shadow into our whole sense of our conscious awareness.
Wow, well put.
In a really just such an incredible way. Like it does it in a very naturally beautiful way. And as you say that, yes, of course, it can be harrowing sometimes facing our shadow. It can be really, but nothing can harm you. All it requires is for you to acknowledge it, to acknowledge that when you were younger, perhaps there was trauma, maybe there was abuse. One needs to deal with that before one can become whole. And so ayahuasca will bring whatever is there blocking. Most people, I guess, of your listeners are familiar with the chakra system, yeah? The energy centers in the body. Yeah. They're just basically energy centers that correspond with the different glands in our body. If there is a blockage in any one of those chakras, like particularly here in the solar plexus, where we have a lot of issues around power, where you may have been disempowered or dominated when you were a child, that's where the medicine will go first. It will go and just unlock, and it'll start to use, I call it spiritual WD-40. It'll spray, and so all these rusty old beliefs and patterns start to become undone, so you can start to unscrew them. Yes. And that means you start to, sometimes you'll have to face up to
that can make a bit of a mess trauma at the time. Yeah.
You can relive experiences that are quite harrowing and strong. But once you've experienced them and released them, that's what you do. You're releasing them from out of the muscular memory, out of one's own psyche. And when you release them, there's more space for conscious awareness, because it takes a lot of energy to keep these unconscious patterns in place. So that's the way that ayahuasca works. It releases these. It's like having a hard drive that's really full of junk. And so you got to delete the junk.
Yeah, you've got to go through and see
lots of space.
What's the junk
there, and you've got to know exactly. So that's what ayahuasca does. Yeah. So it's not like, but it never gives you more than what you can handle. Ayahuasca comes into your body and it reads you more completely than we can, because in our total awareness, I'd say our conscious awareness occupies maybe 15 to 20% max, maybe less. And we think that's who we are. The sleeping giant is that 80% that is unconscious.
I've heard it's 5.
Yeah, there you go. Well, ayahuasca can get into that and see what's going on in there and start to selectively bring to the conscious awareness all of the detritus, the muck, the psychic, emotional, mental garbage that we've accumulated in our unconscious and bring it to the surface. So it is work. You know, in Brazil, they call it trabalho, working upon oneself. You don't become awake just by switching on the light bulb. One needs to deal with all of that which is preventing us from switching on the light bulb first. We need to deal with the dense frequencies.
Yes.
We need to look at that and process that and embrace that. It's like bringing home the prodigal son. We don't go, get out, you know, we don't want you. You stayed away for all these years. You're not welcome here. No, go. You went away for all these years, but you're welcome. The Father always brings home the prodigal son. And that is that aspect of ourselves that embraces the shadow. And in so doing, it diffuses the charge from the shadow. It's not that the shadow goes away. The shadow is only a nemesis while it is charged with repressed emotions. Once you take the charge of those repressed emotions out of the equation, the shadow becomes your ally. It's just like the night and the day. You can't say the day is better than the night. The night has its own magic, its own poetry, its own beauty. And in fact, the night defines the day.
Yes,
they
there
are
is
part
no day
of one
without the
whole
night.
totality. And so the shadow takes its rightful place to become part of our conscious totality, to become part of our wholeness. And this is the purpose of the work that we do with ayahuasca, to become whole.
Well said, man. How do you think we got to this point where these things that are so profound are so demonized? Because there must have been a society that didn't feel that way. You know, you listen to any of Terence's talks and his whole stoned ape theory, and then going beyond that to the tribal, orgiastic way that humans used to coexist together. But how did we get to the point where these enlightening, natural, gifts that come from the earth have become so demonized?
Great question. Really good question. Thank you for asking it, because it's really pertinent. The Mayans have this idea, and they were great masters of time and observing the stars and observing the movements of the planets and stars over vast epochs of time. Like they knew more about time than we do today.
Yeah.
But in other ways, they didn't know. They didn't have the wheel, for example, but they had incredible understanding of time. Yeah. And they understood and espoused the fact that every 5,000 years, there is a shift of a binary code, like a 0 and a 1, but let's call it masculine and feminine. So that every 5,000 years, human consciousness is predominantly masculine or it is predominantly feminine. And we're coming to the end of a 5,000-year period that has been predominantly masculine. And it literally is exemplified in our term history, his story. Our history only goes back 5,000 years. The earliest writings known to man are like 5,000-6,000 years old.
Writings known to man.
In the Sumerian texts.
Yeah, and that's how we say it, known to man.
That's how we say it, exactly. Yeah. But if you go back further in the archaeological record, you go back into the Minoan civilizations, the Greeks, and in most of the ancient civilizations, like in the Indus Valley, you will find that it was predominantly matriarchal. Hence, we had beliefs like Tantra. Like Tantra was the predominant religion in the Indus Valley because it was very feminine. It was inclusive. And you look back into Minoan civilizations, there were no weapons in the graves. Like from 5,000 years up until now, all the warriors had their weapons in their graves, their spears, their gun, whatever it was, because it was predominantly a male dominator culture. And McKenna talks about this a lot in his writings, and he particularly sources a lot of his information from a woman called Riane Eisler. She has a book called The Chalice and the Blade, which I highly recommend you read if you want to understand this cyclic shift from a predominantly masculine to a predominantly feminine modality. And now that we're coming to the end of what McKenna referred to as the male dominator era, where the male was dominating everything and made certain things, demonized certain things, anything that was feminine, in fact. Marriage even is an institution where we, apart from a man's ownership of goods and chattels, his property, his house, also there is the thing of his woman, marriage, ownership of the woman, ownership of the feminine, and that the male rational mind, as is evidenced in our peak of science also, is rational and causal and linear. And what we're at the cusp of now is embracing the non-causal, the more holographic, the more holistic aspect of our consciousness, which is predominantly feminine. And so, as I said earlier, the goddess who has been chained and held down for the last however many years has now unshackled herself and is coming to redress this imbalance. And as the rise of the divine feminine happens within our collective consciousness, these substances and sacraments which have heretofore been demonized and made illegal are starting to come to the fore, like the psychedelics, like these sacred plants.
Yes.
And why is that occurring? Why were they demonized? Because there was once all of the great religions, like if you go back to Hindu, even Buddhism, into like most of the religions, Toltec, Olmec, were all inspired by these plants. All of the pantheon of the gods in the Hindu push is inspired by plants. And then at a certain point in evolution, as we went from the matriarchy, where these plants were made holy and sacred, as the priests started to take over from the direct experience of the plants, the transmissions we're giving, suddenly we had the birth of religions. So what was a direct experience from the plants suddenly became a structure, a power structure, that priests were the arbiters of that structure. So suddenly we weren't having direct experience of the divine. We were having the experience of the divine through the agency or the interlocution of these people called priests,
and they could manipulate it however they wanted.
Yeah, and I'll speak to God and I'll pass that down to you, my congregation. And so we became divorced from the direct experience, and so suddenly it became a power structure,
a little power struggle. Yeah,
and it became more and more masculine. More and more control, more and more domination. Whereas in the matriarchal times, and I'm not glorifying the feminine over the masculine, because in the matriarchal times, the feminine also got out of balance. It had to be, the feminine has a shadow side too, and had to be redressed. What does that look like? Well, the feminine shadow looks more like, instead of control, it's
more chaotic.
It's more chaotic, but it's all emotional manipulation. It's like, it's all the unsaid, and it's sort of like, it's more manipulative, especially on an emotional level. And so the clarity of the light of masculine awareness would have redressed that and made that and brought it to balance.
But it gets
balanced. It would come to balance, but then it goes out of balance again. And so now the feminine side is starting to redress that imbalance, and we're about to start a whole new 5,000-year cycle. And that's why these plants are coming more into the fore, because what is needed today for most of humanity is a direct experience of the divine, not a sutra or a Quran or a Bible or some sort of like holy scripture or creed or dogma. All of these things have their place. But when they become the go-to source for how to live your life, it's a pale echo or a pale shadow of the direct experience of the divine. And so what ayahuasca and these psychedelics offer is exactly that, a direct experience of your own divinity. Not that the divine is out there, it's within you. As all the great masters, all the great spiritual seers, all of the great beings that have realized themselves have all pointed towards. Stop looking in the wrong place. It's not out there. There is no God out there other than the one that you are inside, which is reflected everywhere. And so this is the great realization that these plants are here to initiate within us and to birth within us that kind of reality, and also to help us, take us by the hand until we get our sea legs And then when you can walk fully awake, open, in full sovereignty, become a conscious custodian of this beautiful planet in the far-flung reaches of the Milky Way, then and only then we can say, thank you, ayahuasca, thank you, plants. But you don't need to use them forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
You don't need to stay with a teacher all your life.
Yes, it's not a pharmaceutical. Yeah.
No, but I still drink it because I give it to people. But if I wasn't giving it to people, it's in me. I know. It's now part of me.
It's
that
about
awareness.
integrating the lessons.
And if I drink it, it's because it's for celebration and joy of the divine. It's not because I need the understanding or the teaching or the healing. It's there. And so then the medicine says, now start transmitting that, start sharing that, start being a generator of this frequency. And therein lies your Dharma.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I wow. I think I was listening to something recently and they were talking about psychedelics and how they aren't, the guy was saying psychedelics don't cure anything. What they do is they show you yourself and they give you insight, and it is up to you to integrate the insight.
Absolutely.
And that's something that
right.
and I feel like I haven't done psychedelics for quite a while now. I had my last experience was pretty hard. Was really hard. It was quite traumatic, and I didn't really I didn't come out of it well, and I didn't have the support that I think I needed. It's
very important to integrate these experiences, and that's where a skilled therapist or a skilled guide can be of assistance.
I completely understand that now. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I've also known that, for me, one of my last experiences was after having a terribly dark mushroom experience. I smoked DMT. And I'd done it 2 times before that, and then this most recent time, there was always a female energy that would come to me. And this time, the first time I was in ancient Egypt, and there was this female guide, very kindly showing me around and just so excited that I was there. The second time was like the hippie 60s, man, and these females were dancing around in front of me, and they were showing me themselves. It was very sexual, and they were. And then the third time, it was dark, it was quite silent, and there was a female in the distance, like quite far away, with her back to me, and that was it. And basically, I got the message of, you need to stop coming here. You got stuff to do away from here. And so that was basically what I took from it.
It's amazing that you share this, because this is how these substances, these sacraments, these wonderful, I call them intelligence agents, psychedelics. That's the Leary term. Timothy Leary actually coined that phrase. I like it. They are intelligence agents. What they have an inbuilt governor within them. So that when you do DMT, and I've heard this story, what you've shared from so many different people, where the initial experiences were very, very positive. And then there was this thing of, you've done your time here, now go back into the earth, integrate this, live it in your being, but, you're not to come here until that level has been now integrated, or at least to treat this with great respect, not just out of some idle curiosity or some sort of like thrill seeking, or just to, just let's explore the dimension because it's there. One needs to take the responsibility for integration.
Yeah.
These are teachers, plants. And if you're not integrating what you're doing into your life, they will cease to teach.
Yes. I got that loud and clear.
They'll give bad experiences, or they'll chase you out of the room, or they'll just give you some colors and things without showing up in their full, dimension. And so, but they also know if you're putting it into practice. They know what's going on inside of you. You can't hide. Mm-hmm. And if they see that you're doing it and putting it into practice, they give you more and more and more juice. Yeah. That's just the way it works. Like any teacher, if you show interest and you show enthusiasm and putting things into practice that they're teaching you, they'll give you more and more. But if they see that you're not really putting it into practice, you're just showing up and loving the thrill of seeing what you're seeing, then they just go, listen, the student comes to the teacher. The teacher doesn't come to the student. Come back when you're ready. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, that's what I was doing. at the time. I remember even thinking, like, what's my intention? Just to see what happens. Not that, and
that can be okay for the first couple of immersions, but unless you go deeper, they're going to go, nah, sorry.
Yeah. So that was the last time that I did it. But it's interesting. I know, I know that they will call me, and I'm a dad now. I got a 2-year-old daughter, and it's been a while, and that I have done more growth than I have done in my entire life in the last 2 years, and just changed so much as a person. And it's there. I mean, look, we're having this in-depth conversation about it now, and the call is there, and I knew, and I've always known it'll call me again, and it's quiet, but it's getting louder. Isn't it interesting how they summon you? Like you felt it at 17 years old.
Indeed. Well, yes, I was, because I have done this in past lives. I've seen this clearly in many, many journeys that I've taken. And, it's like anything that you carry over. Like, Mozart created his first concerto at 3 years old.
Yeah.
That's not just random. He had a gift that he had a tendency, a quality that was already there. He didn't just learn that, And so different people have different qualities. And, of course, people who have talents, that's what it is. And so I had this talent for multidimensional awareness. And for me, I've always had, the spiritual path has always been my main focus. I've never had sort of a straight job, so to speak. I've been always on the spiritual path. And I've had many, many different spiritual teachers apart from the plants along the way, because it's also been formalized in various different traditions. I lived with Osho for many years in an ashram in Pune in India.
Wow.
I currently have a teacher called Choyze Kachchen Rinpoche in Bhutan. He's a Buddhist teacher. And so it's important to have a mentor and a spiritual guide. And I've always had this along the way, and I've been fortunate to have very great teachers. And this is what I always call upon in my work with the plants, because I put it within the context of the larger spiritual awakening. It's not just for, the plants can be used for so many different things, for creativity, for healing, for teaching, for transformation, but also the plants, when they're used within the context of ultimate awakening, like for full realization of who we are, then they are very powerful agents.
Yeah.
But they have to be brought within the context of that kind of an unfolding for them to work and open up in that way, because they respond to you individually. There's no kind of like prescribed.
No, it's like you do cocaine and everybody kind of gets the same thing. You know what you're going to get. It's not like that at all.
No, not at all. It's highly individually designed for each individual.
And even every time I've done, mushrooms or anything, each time I'm like, fuck, I don't know what I'm going to get this time. It's completely, I mean, there are qualities that are similar, but the place that you are taken to is, from my personal experience, has always been
absolutely.
All right. It's probably why it's so frightening every time you got to do, as you said, still to this day, you're going.
And having used cocaine and, all kinds of drugs and alcohol, and in my time, I have to attribute to ayahuasca that I completely stopped doing any of that stuff, because ayahuasca will not allow you to keep drinking it and keep doing that stuff.
Right.
And I saw it. She showed me what it was doing, if you're smoking cigarettes, for example, a lot of people can say, oh, listen, you're smoking cigarettes, it's bad for your health, you should stop. And you go, yeah, I agree, I should stop. There's still that should there. And so you try and stop, you stop for a while, but then as you start to do it, there's a rubber band effect. And you kind of can do it for a while, and you go, pow, and it goes back the other way, and you kind of go back to it, And you go, oh, shit, I've regressed, I've gone back to smoking. Well, ayahuasca won't try and convince you or tell you any belief system. It'll take you into your lungs as a disembodied I, and you will see for yourself inside your lungs the tar, the bullshit, the junk. And once you've seen that, you just can't do it anymore, because it's not a thing of should, would, or could. It's just like, no way, I can't support that.
I'm killing myself.
That's right. And so it's a realization. It's not a belief. It's not like I should do that for my benefit and for those around me. It's like, there's no question. Once you see truly what's going on, it's no question. You just to stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so ayahuasca can show you where you're pissing away your energy, your life energy, in so many different ways. It's like having a hose with the stones in it along the way. You know, you're getting a weak dribble coming out the end because all with holes in it, you know. There's holes coming out the hose everywhere. Yeah. Ayahuasca's going, stop pissing your energy out here. Look what you're doing in your behavior.
Yeah.
Is this really serving you?
That's why it's hard to hear.
I know, but it's not telling you what to do.
No.
It's just showing you the effects of what you do. It's up to you to change.
And
she's not going to change you for you. You need to take responsibility, and that's the main catchphrase, the main quality that ayahuasca teaches is take responsibility for yourself.
And I think, and that is challenging, taking responsibility because our ego always wants to tell us that everything we're doing all the time is the right thing to be doing. It never wants to be shown that we've made an incorrect decision. Even little ones, right. It can be hard to admit to. But if we've been making decisions for years that are not optimal decisions and we are shown them, if another person shows them to us, you can just go, fuck you, and dismiss it. But if you're in a psychedelic journey and it feels like you or the universe is showing you, there's no one to blame. So it can be other than yourself. So that it can be so confronting and frightening. But that's the journey that you got to go through to be able to go, oh, wow.
It is. And there's no way avoiding that journey. One needs to take that journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff, man. So just coming back to, we were talking about the balance between the masculine and the feminine energies within our world. It's something that I've observed recently is just how much that dominant masculine is trying to hang on to control.
That's right.
It appears to me that it's kind of females and women are being pushed to kind of be more masculine, and it's being disguised as feminism, but a lot of it is just kind of encouraging women to be more masculine and not be feminine.
Classic. When I was, I grew up in the 70s and I went to university in the 70s. That was the time of Germaine Greer. I don't know if you know about her.
Yeah.
She was the first one to sort of burn the bra and pronounce feminism and the equality of women. And in those days, because it was naive at the beginning of this movement, women believed that in order to be equal to men, they had to become men. And so they started wearing dungarees, cutting their hair short, acting really butch, and doing all of that, which is understandable because it was a naive attempt at equality, but completely missing the point.
Yes. Because
a woman is a woman and a man is a man.
Yes.
For a woman to become a man is just, well, even though today with LGBTQ XYZ, it's been compounded even to the point of absurdity.
Yes.
But let's just stay with that example. To become a man was missing the point. The whole point about men and women is that they are different. They are complements.
They're two halves to one whole.
And exactly. And the woman is feminine and the masculine is masculine. And the dance that happens between them of yin and yang, of up and down, in and out, right and wrong, good and evil is the whole duality we experience in this third dimensional plane. And so it's absolutely the very core of our experience of navigating through this experience that we call life. But at the very core of it is this polarity of masculine and feminine. And so the way of true liberation, which I believe is happening more now in the feminist movement, is for women to claim their femininity and for men to claim their masculinity. Another one of my great teachers was a man called David Deida. He was a tantric teacher, and if anybody is interested in looking him up, he's an amazing person. He talked about the masculine and the feminine having to empower each other. So, he says what's happening in our world today is that you see women who can only really be fulfilled when the masculine is really holding them and really being present and really be serving the feminine. That's the masculine's nature, is deep fulfillment for a masculine is to fully serve the feminine. He'll climb like the hero's journey.
Yeah, save the
climb
princess.
Mountains. Yeah, save the princess. Exactly. He'll do anything to do that. So it's service. So, but for the woman to be fully opened, as a flower can open, she needs to be loved with totality, and she needs to be accepted in all of her light and dark characteristics. And what classically happens in a relationship in modern day times is, it's all hunky-dory when we project onto the other, wow, I'm in love with you, it's all beautiful, there's this incredible hormonal sort of high that you're on as you fall in love, and, the whole masculine, feminine dance happens. But in the moment, Kali, she's Aphrodite then suddenly Kali comes into the story, and her shadow shows the man classically runs for shelter, and so she feels like, oh, I'm abandoned, I'm not being held. And so she starts to put on this masculine shell. So she goes, oh, well, I can't trust my man to be around. I can't trust him to bring home the bacon or get the buffalo and bring it home, which is the primal energy between them. So naturally, I'm going to have to take responsibility for looking after myself. And so slowly this masculine shell occurs over the deep feminine. And so you get women going off into a big business suit in New York, doing business, fighting it out, hardcore business with all of the other men. And there's nothing wrong with that in itself. But what happens is there's a strangulation of the deep feminine, and also the polarity between the man and the woman starts to diminish. Let me break it down into 3 stages. The way that a relationship between a man and a woman can be seen is stage 1, which is more like how my parents operated. Like the man goes out, earns the money, woman stays at home, does the dishes, cooks for the kids, looks after, clean, has the food on the table for the hubby when he comes home, and they make love and it's all good. And but the man is away during the day, the woman's there with the kids. And I mean, that worked. That worked for that generation. The polarity was good and strong. The masculine was going out there, getting the buffalo, bringing it home. The woman was getting her love and her joy and her blissful radiance to nurture the masculine. But then what happened in my generation, stage 2 relating, was that we said that's really kind of like a little polarized and kind of like a little unfair. Like, should the woman have to stay at home and do all that sort of humdrum work? Why can't she also have a job? Why can't she also have her own bank account, not just be dependent upon the male to dole it out? Why can't the masculine also look after the kids every now and then and do the dishes and take care of the cleaning? And so my generation went, yeah, that's good. That seems fair. So we did that. We started to become more egalitarian, become more fair, like, okay, I have my own individuality, you have yours, but we come together as a unit. We may be married, but I'm still going to look after the kids. You can have a side job and do that. And it was a bit of an advancement from stage 1. It was a good, more egalitarian way to be, and took care of the emerging personality or the individuation of both the masculine and feminine. But what happened as a result of that? The polarity that was there in the first stage started to diminish, become more neutral. And what happened was couples started to spend a lot of time processing. Like they're going, I need you to hear me. I want this and this and this, and I'm entitled to that. And the other person would say, yes, I know, and I think that's fair, and this is fair. And they started to work it out, like working on these contracts. But guess what? Lovemaking stopped. Suddenly their polarity became neutral as they became more equal, and the juiciness, the kind of thing where the wild man comes and ravishes the woman and completely makes love from that higher place disappeared. And it was more like, oh, no, I'm not up for it now because I just don't have the energy. And, because they became more equal, and the polarity diminished. So what David Deida was teaching was that we need to reclaim our masculinity, and that women need to reclaim their femininity, because what's happening is men have this feminine shell over them. Oh, I should be more, more kind of like subjective, more empathetic. I should feel into this more. And rightly so. We did need to bring up our feminine side, because we each have a masculine and feminine side, but not to the expense of diminishing our polarity. And that's the side effect of what's happened. So the new way of being that I see is the way through is to come back to establishing that a man is a masculine, and that a woman is feminine, but that they are equal in their differences, and that the masculine absolutely requires the feminine, and vice versa, in order to become a totality within the unit. And that can be done by that women can still absolutely have a job, and men and women can still share the chores of either going out and getting the bacon or being at home taking care of the kids. But they need to be able to drop that mantle of the overlaid masculine or feminine shell and put it aside when they're in their personal relating, so that man takes responsibility for kind of like the kind of things that a masculine does, which is being decisive, organizing things for the feminine, serving the feminine, so the feminine can feel held, can feel supported, can feel nourished, so that she can give her true gift, which is her incredible effulgence, her essence, her radiance, which most women never give because they don't fully trust the masculine. In other words, the masculine has to earn the trust of the woman, and the woman will test the masculine by showing up as Carly, by being a harridan. And if the masculine runs in the other direction, then she's going to go, just as I thought, he can't be trusted. So I got to get it together. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And hence they can still be together, but the respect and the working together as the polarity of masculine and feminine doesn't operate at its highest potential. But the moment we consciously become aware of, okay, we can share everything, but in the bedroom and at home and the way we conduct our lives, I'm going to hold the masculine and she's going to hold the divine feminine. This can happen between same-sex couples as well, where one, again, for the polarity to be there, one has to be predominantly masculine, one has to be predominantly feminine. Otherwise, again, there's this neutral ground, which is kind of asexual. And for the juice and for the gifting of the sexual, energy and the gift and the vitality of life, we need to have this strong polarity. It's just like two magnets. Once they become depolarized, there's no attraction. And so we need to keep this attraction alive whilst at the same time evolving beyond stereotypical kind of role playing that my parents used to have to be in, which was also unsatisfactory to them. It was also very limiting to be in that. My mother particularly felt restrained in her role as the woman in that kind of thing because women weren't allowed to do certain things, and so on and so forth. But that should be lifted. But we need to remember that we are polar, complementary, not opposites, complementaries.
Yes.
And if this is a part of our spiritual practice, if it's brought into the relationship, into our relating, that we consciously embody the masculine as men, and that we consciously embody, that women consciously embody the divine feminine as a woman. And that needs to be nurtured by the feminine. So there's women's business and men's business. Men come together to amplify and to validate the masculine in each other, and they have their ways of doing that. And women also come together and nourish and support and amplify the divine feminine, like a woman might join a group of temple dancing or, beautification or some interest that requires the feminine to be fully come to the fore, where they can feel fully validated and nourished within the feminine, and similarly so for the masculine. And then when the masculine and feminine comes together within the personal relationship, it's just so much more juicy, so much more alive, so much more vivid than the kind of depolarized, neutral, kind of like fair relating that is passed off as modern day kind of like, it's that kind of thing. Yeah, quality. So it's a big topic, and I've only just covered the very superficial kind of extrapolation of how this can evolve. But I do think that it's at the heart of everything we've been speaking about today, and that it's the redressing this imbalance of the male dominator energy with the divine feminine, which is, admirably expressed through the use of psychedelics and in other ways, of course, to bring the masculine and the feminine into balance, into the rightful honoring of each other for the qualities that they each exemplify and embody. Yeah. Not that one has to copy the other in order to feel equal, And so this is at the heart of it, and this is the spiritual practice that all couples, conscious couples, are required to adopt in these times.
And it's a dance.
One way or the other. Yeah, it's a dance.
It's man, that's some that's some good stuff right there, man. That's a journey that is it could, because what you're describing requires a whole lot of self-discovery and
it all starts with self-discovery.
Yeah, and also trust in your partner.
That's right.
And trust that they are on the journey of self-discovery and growth together. It's a tricky dance.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think a lot of people really struggle with that because, again, it's much easier to just point the finger. You need to do this, and then I'll be happy. Vice versa.
That's right. The classic. Yeah, but one has to remember that it's a dance and not a formula. It's a dance, and so we need to treat it with the way we treat a dance: light-hearted, with joy, with letting ourselves go into the dance.
Yeah.
Rather than being mental and trying to control what we think the dance should be, this way or that way, or excuse me, and to allow that play, that play to occur. Playfulness is at the very heart of this rebalancing. One, in relating, we need to adopt that playful attitude, and not be too serious about it, and yet at the same time being playfully serious about it. We are working upon ourselves here. This is spiritual practice. That's kind of the notion, and that's the way I conduct all of my relationships, not just my deep personal relationships, but all of my relationships, my friends' relationships, my client relationships, my tribal relationships, from that place, of honoring and of validation but it starts from within. It starts with oneself. It's like being in the airplane when they say, look, if we have an accident, don't just give the air mask to your child first. Give it to yourself first, because you're not going to be much help to your child if you're asphyxiating.
Yes.
So one needs to give oneself, loving oneself, self-love. Self-worth is the very heart, the very core of everything we're speaking about. And we haven't even touched upon that. That's a whole other podcast.
Handle your shit. That's the Buddhist teaching, isn't it? Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Deal with it.
Man.
Yeah.
Dar Pan, I feel like we could just keep talking for hours and hours, but we should probably call it at some point, man. This has been the epitome of what I set out to do with this Deep and Meaningful podcast, mate. Thank you.
Fantastic.
So much.
Thank you, Mark. Wonderful to connect with you. And I know that you're Fiona said, you're going to love this guy. He's a great guy, So I said, well, that's cool, because I don't often do podcasts with people I don't know, but on her recommendation, I went, yeah, cool, let's do that.
Oh,
and
man.
I'm so happy I did. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Mate, my pleasure is all mine. And I hope we can do it again soon, man. And I hope we can hang out in person, dude. This has been really great.
I look forward to that. Yeah.
All right, mate. Cheers.
Great. Fantastic. Lots of love, bro.